If you can take a seat, we're about to get started. And if we could try to move everyone in from the foyer and get a seat, we'll start in just about 2 minutes. Okay, well, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Scott Angle. I'm the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, and today is our D.W. Brooks Lecture Day. This is a highlight of the year for the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, and I want to thank you all for being a part of this. We're going to begin this morning by recognizing some of our award winners who are many of your colleagues in the college and around this campus. We will then be hearing from our D.W. Brooks lecturer this year, Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. But before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of background on D.W. Brooks. He was someone that I never had the opportunity to meet. He died just a few years before I came to Georgia. But he was a very special person to our college, this university, and the great state of Georgia, as well as American agriculture. In 1922, he taught agronomy in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at the University of Georgia, and he was still in his teens at that time. And he was still teaching at the University of Georgia at the age of 97, and so he holds simultaneously the record for being both the youngest and the oldest professor at the University of Georgia. Between that time, 19 and 97, when he passed away, he had obviously a very distinguished career beyond just the University of Georgia. He was a founder of Goldkist, a poultry company in the state that went on to be one of the largest poultry producers in the country. He developed Cotton States Insurance Company to make sure that farmers had access to good money management. He was the advisor to 7 U.S. presidents in agricultural policy and trade. He's held many positions in a variety of other countries, and he's won many of the honors that are bestowed upon agriculturalists throughout this country. When we think about name-changing, industry-changing individuals like D.W. Brooks or Norman Borlaug, who you'll be hearing more about in just a few minutes, we've got some wonderful individuals in our college as well who have made great contributions in so many important ways. And one of the things that we would like to do is ask them to come in now, and I'll call out their names and recognize each one of them. We'll be recognizing them a little more at an awards banquet later on today over lunch. So let me begin with that, and I'm going to call each of their names, and if they could walk up front and take a seat in the front row. So our D.W. Brooks Faculty Awards for Excellence in Teaching are Dr. Terry Sentner. Terry, if you can start your way up. He's a professor of agriculture and applied economics. Our Faculty Awards for Excellence in Research is Dr. Tim Gray. He's a professor of crop and soil sciences. In Extension, it's Dr. Dennis Hancock. He's an associate professor in crop and soil sciences. For Public Service Extension, Janet Hollingsworth. She's our County Extension Coordinator for Appling County. She's a Family and Consumer Sciences agent in both Appling and Ware counties. And for Global Programs, Ignacy Mistal, he's a Professor of Animal and Dairy Sciences. For our Outstanding Academic Advisor, it's Dr. Frank Flanders. He's an Assistant Professor of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communications. College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences Staff Awards for Administrative and Professional Support, Mr. Bryce Nelson. He's the Director of Student and Employer Engagement in the Office of Academic Affairs. Technical Support is Mr. Jay Bauer. He's our Senior Graphics Designer in the college's Office of Communications and Creative Services. For skilled trades, we have 2 individuals, Mr. C.J. O'Mara and Miss Brooke Powell. He is a senior ag specialist and ag individual for the J. Phil Campbell Farm. D.W. Brooks Diversity Award. Faculty is Cesar Escalante. He's an associate professor of agriculture and applied economics. And for our student, it's Brittany Thurkield. She's a graduate student in our Department of Food Science and Technology. Let's give all of our award winners a great big round of applause. When we began searching for a person to deliver today's D.W. Brooks lecture, one individual quickly rose to the top. As many of you know, we have had a number of past World Food Prize winners as a speaker in this lecture series, and this year we wanted to hear directly from the founder and leader of the program that many of us consider to be the Nobel Prize of Agriculture. Dr. Ken Quinn, Ambassador Kenneth Quinn, embodies so many of the principles and commitment to excellence and to agriculture that D.W. Brooks and Dr. Norman Borlaug have demonstrated throughout their careers. Kenneth Quinn is the former ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia, and during his diplomatic career, Ken Quinn served as a rural development advisor in the Mekong Delta. He was on the National Security Council staff of the White House as the narcotics counselor at the U.S. mission to the United Nations in Vienna. For 4 years, he was chairman of the U.S. Interagency Task Force on POW and MIAs, and as director of Iowa Shares, the humanitarian campaign that sent Iowa doctors, nurses, medical supplies, and food to starving refugees in Cambodia. Very, very distinguished career, many, many interesting stories, and he has led just an absolutely fascinating life. Dr. Quinn emerged from these experiences as one of the U.S. government's foremost experts on Indochina, a fluent speaker in Vietnamese. Dr. Emrit Bart's wife is Vietnamese, and at dinner last night, he walked up to her and he began speaking directly to her in Vietnamese, and I think she was as blown away as the rest of us that he had such a command of, for those of you who know anything about the Vietnamese language, it is one of the most difficult languages to learn. Dr. Quinn has acted as an interpreter for President Gerald Ford at the White House and personally negotiated the first ever entry of U.S. personnel into a Vietnamese prison to search for U.S. POWs and MIAs. He was also a member of the first U.S. team to gain entry to a former Soviet prison in Russia. Ambassador Quinn rose to become one of the most decorated Foreign Service officers of his generation, recognized for the important role he played in humanitarian endeavors, as well as for his actions in dangerous and violent situations and throughout the world. He has received the Secretary of State's Award for Heroism and Valor for his effort to protect American citizens exposed to danger in Cambodia, as well as the 4 life-saving rescues in which he participated in Vietnam. He has been the only civilian to ever receive the U.S. Army Air Medal for his participation in combat operations in Vietnam. He's also the only Foreign Service officer to ever have 3 times received the American Foreign Service Association Revkin and Herder Award for intellectual courage and policy. Following his retirement after 32 years of distinguished service with the State Department Foreign Service, he became leader of the World Food Prize Foundation. Inspired by the vision of Dr. Norman Borlaug, the founder of the World Food Prize, Ambassador Quinn set out by building an annual $250,000 award into the Nobel Prize for Food and Agriculture. So with that, I would like to invite Ambassador Quinn to the podium to deliver the 2014 D.W. Brooks Lecture. Ambassador Quinn.
Thank you. So nice. Thank you, Dean Engel. Thank you. What a nice introduction. congratulations to all of you. If Norm Borlaug were here, he'd be down there shaking all your hands and telling you to keep it up and reach for the stars, as he always did. So it's wonderful to be here and on the university campus again. I was here in 1979 very briefly, but it's nice to be back. And I was out there during the reception, and I heard someone saying, "This is the happiest day of the year." And I thought, wow, Brooks lecture, and they must have heard something about me that there. And then the next comment was, "That's because there are no more political ads on TV after today." So yes, and I'm from Iowa, and we can't wait for there to be no more political ads. But I hope everybody at least everybody who's an American citizen and a Georgia citizen, have voted today. You know, voting's a little bit like food in America. Two things we take for granted, right? Always going to be enough food, and always our politics, our government's always in place. But I worked in Cambodia, where people starved, and where to go to vote, you had to run the risk of the Khmer Rouge terrorists trying to kill you. And people went out, were really brave to do that. They changed the course of direction of their country. So it's always good to be reminded of that, and what a great privilege we have to live in a democracy, even though we wish those negative ads weren't always out there on TV and that. So I'm really honored to be able to give the D.W. Brooks lecture. Dean Angle, thank you so much. There, I know Glenn Burton gave the first one, and that Dr. Borlaug gave a lecture here, as did Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter is part of the connection that the World Food Prize has. He's a member of our Council of Advisors. We also have one member of our staff. We're a really small organization. Keegan Kautsky's here. And this is about 15% of the entire World Food Prize staff is in this room with you today. But Lisa Fleming's a grad of the University of Georgia. And through her, we also have links to two artists here. So the Art Rosenbaum, I don't know, I didn't get a chance to see the mural he did at the Center for Humanities called The World at Large. But he did a Borlaug poster for us that's on the left. And Greg Benson, who's also a Georgia graduate, did another poster for us. And we also have a couple of students who I'll mention later, but who have been in our youth programs from Georgia. So we've got a small connection, but I've got one other connection I want to tell you about, and that is from Dean Rusk. So I don't know how many of you were around when Dean Rusk came to the faculty on that, but he's now has a distinguished center at the law school about him. And so the reason I want to tell you about Dean Rusk's connection is that I grew up in the city. I was born in the Bronx, New York. My dad took a job in the Middle West, and we moved to Dubuque, Iowa. I have no connection to agriculture. Unlike probably everybody else in the room, I didn't want to study agriculture. I had no interest in working on a farm or have anything to do. I took the Foreign Service exam and passed the oral exam, and my vision was of diplomatic sugar plums. I was going to be going to London or Paris, and I'd be in these chandeliered ballrooms and sipping aperitifs and discussing the nuances of international affairs, which is what I thought diplomats did. And then I got to the State Department, where Dean Rusk was Secretary of State, and I found out that he had agreed that they would send Foreign Service officers to Vietnam. And particularly if you were male and single and under the age of 26, and you'd never been in the military. And before I knew what happened, I was being trained in Vietnamese, and it is as hard as the dean mentioned. And I wasn't a very good student. And 10 months later, I'm on a plane, and you say, well, you know, you're a Foreign Service officer. You're going to work in the embassy in Saigon. And I thought, well, maybe. I don't know if they have aperitifs, but it'd be all right. Then I got to Saigon. No, So you're going to go out to a regional capital, one of those big cities. Well, no. And I said, well, maybe I'm going to be in a provincial capital. There's like 44 provinces. I'll be working there. And they said, no. And I found myself out as a district senior advisor heading a 10-member U.S. military advisory team in Sadek province in the middle of the Mekong Delta. And they said, the job is easy. Just go out, defeat the Viet Cong insurgents, reform the administration, and win the hearts and minds of the people so we can win the war. And usually when I tell people that story, they say, now I understand what the problem was in Vietnam. So this is my job. And I had 8 villages where I was the advisor. And we worked the Vietnamese government. And there were, Viet Cong underground, and we had, used B-52 bombs and boots on the ground. You never could get rid of them. And then, by serendipity, by chance, 2 things happened. Number 1, the Green Revolution came to Southeast Asia. The same miracle as Norman Borlaug was doing miracle wheat to take it to India. A guy named Hank Beechel from Nebraska was at the International Rice Research Institute, and he came up with IR8 miracle rice. And IR8 miracle rice now could be grown in half the time as traditional floating rice. You could get a crop in 3 months, so you could get 2 crops in a year, plus have enough time left over to grow melons or other kind of fruit or vegetables. And suddenly, farmers could have the opportunity of having surplus produce, surplus crops, sell it, have money to help lift them out of poverty. So that's the one thing that's happening. And we had, ag advisors who were coming to try to convince farmers using regular extension to convince them. Because if I touched the IR8, the plants knew instinctively they didn't have to grow, they just die and then same. And then the other, just by chance, is there was an old French road that went between all 8 villages. And it was in a terrible state of disrepair. You couldn't use it. There were all these canals there. There needed to be bridges over it. And so we were fixing the road. And we had engineers down doing that. And somewhere it just got scheduled that way. And so as I went around, I observed what became the lesson of my life. Because I saw that we had fixed the road through 4 villages, and everywhere that we fixed the road, farmers used the IR8 rice. And where the road stopped, the IR8 rice stopped. There wasn't any sign that said no IR8 rice after this. It just was that somehow the technology flowed down that road in a way that I couldn't totally explain, but you could see it demonstrated before your eyes. And I saw this and wanted to know more about it and what's happening. And you would see the impact, because now trucks, of course, could come down from Saigon. They could go to the farm gate to buy from farmers. And beyond that, the extension workers could get down. Now there were little taxis that went from hamlet to hamlet, so kids could stay in school longer. You saw every farmhouse, everywhere they're using IR8 rice. Now the farmers have got metal roofing because they've got extra money to buy the metal sheeting to go on top of their roof. The structures, the houses look more sturdy. People are better dressed. Kids are better dressed. You can see even in a year or two how better nourished they were. And child mortality goes down because now moms with sick kids can get them out to a medical help or to the doctor or to the pharmacy in time to intervene. And somehow, in all of this, the roads and rice undercut the Viet Cong guerrillas because they started to evaporate. Now, it used to be that you could go to a lot of these villages during the day if you took security, but you didn't go at night. Now you could go day and night, and you could go without security. Somehow, this ability to see other opportunities, to be able to go back and forth, to see the reality of what's outside, undercut the Viet Cong in a way that the bombs and the troops on the ground and the enhanced military technology could not. But where the road stopped, all of that progress stopped along with it. And if you'd go beyond that and you'd drive your four-wheel drive vehicle across through the canal, or you went across on a little sampan and rode in the back of a motorbike, whatever, you'd see that those villages were unchanged. Houses are ramshackle, clothes are threadbare, kids look malnourished, they're not in school, and the Viet Cong were just as strong as ever. And I took that with me as a lesson that would endure. And it sort of led to a conversion for me. So I was going to write some memoir. My chapter here would be called, A Foot Soldier in the Green Revolution. And that because I was there, I was seeing what the impact could be with my eyes. And I ended up, I actually was assigned to go to Western Europe and work in one of those fancy embassies. And I told the State Department, no, I don't want to do that. I want to stay in Vietnam. Now, many of you may know that when you show such a clear instance of mental instability, the State Department or organizations bring you back right away. But they were desperate for guys to stay in Vietnam. So I stayed, and I stayed for 6 years, and it changed the course of my life. And I saw the critical relationship of agriculture and agricultural technology to security, national security, to military security. And I carried it with me, and my life and my career focused on Indochina. And I came back to this in 1990 when I became Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. The Khmer Rouge had ruled Cambodia for 4.5 years. They had caused the deaths of about 2 million out of 7 million people in that period of time. The entire country was tumultuously turned upside down. And despite the fact that 200,000 North Vietnamese troops, remember the greatest jungle fighting army in history, had spent a decade trying to get rid of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, they gave up and went home. And so when the international community, came back to Cambodia, there were 25,000 Khmer Rouge all over the countryside. They controlled everything in the countryside except the towns and the main roads. And I went to the Prime Minister and got my aid colleagues, and I had $11 million of aid budget, not very much. And I said, take this and go and rent all the road grading equipment you can find in Thailand, drive it in, let's do contracts for highways, let's get agricultural technology, and let's start bringing it in and taking it out into the countryside. And it's like the way that the roads that we were building, these new rural roads, were like the bloodstream that allows chemotherapy to go to the cancerous tumor. Because once, as we built the roads and got there, that flow of information, of life, of education, of uplifting people went out into the countryside and into all these places where the Khmer Rouge were, and undercutting them and devastating them. And so 9 years later, as I was about to leave, in March of 1999, now when I'm ambassador, and that the last Khmer Rouge surrendered. So we had eliminated, annihilated the single greatest genocidal terrorist organization of the second half of the 20th century, using the kind of tools and mechanisms that all of you work on here. So it was the lesson I took with me, and when I retired and I was hired to take over the World Food Prize. I had never met Norman Borlaug. And you can imagine I show up in Des Moines, and I meet him for the first time. And what's he going to think of me? As you know, I'm a fancy pants diplomat. And so I'm trying, to do my tap dance, so, give him the best impression. And I'm telling him my story about villages and Green Revolution and IR8 and anything to impress him. And he's looking over at me, and he finally interrupts, and I'm talking about roads and this and that, and he goes, "Roads?" Jeez, I thought I was being fired before I got started. And Norm Borlaug said, "You're absolutely right. Roads are absolutely critical to all of this." So here are these two Iowa guys, one who was born on this farm, and here in northeast Iowa near Cresco, and me from Dubuque, and we became partners for the next decade in the World Food Prize. So I want to be sure you know just a little bit about Norm, that he grew up there in one school, in a one-room schoolhouse. His only mistake in life was that he went to University of Minnesota. I said that at his memorial service in Minneapolis, and then said, but thank God he did, because it was there that he learned all the things that allowed him to change the world. But and then he went to Mexico and spent several decades there developing his miracle wheat, finally crossing the Mexican varieties with a Japanese semi-dwarf, so that these high-yielding wheat could still stand up in the field, and then took it to India and Pakistan in the mid-'60s at the invitation of the United Nations, saved hundreds of millions of people from famine and starvation because he convinced both countries to adapt his whole approach to agriculture. And then in 1970, he's awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So from the great moment, no one in agriculture had ever received that. So he kind of goes into a little period, not too much happens there. Norm was about 60 or so, but I think it was coming to Georgia, Dean Engel, that given that Brooks lecture in 1984, they got Norm going again, because in 1986, here he is with President Carter, and they're in Africa with the Sasakawa Africa Association and their plan to uplift, to bring the Green Revolution to Africa. One of Norm's dreams, that that continent could have all of the benefits that happened in Asia and was happening in Latin America. And then that same year, he started the World Food Prize. There he is at the first Council of Advisors meeting. And in 1987, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan receives the World Food Prize. He was Norm's partner in bringing the Green Revolution to India. And Swami, as we all call him, is still alive. He chairs our selection committee, and that was just in Des Moines. And the World Food Prize was known then as the General Foods World Food Prize, because it had been a partnership with General Foods Company. But then in 1990, General Foods was taken over in a corporate restructuring. The prize was about to disappear, and a man named John Ruan, who's in that second chair from the left, in Iowa, stepped forward. He and Borlaug were both 77 years of age, both from small towns in Iowa, both born in 1914, and he rescued the World Food Prize, brought it to Iowa, and it's been there ever since. And it's a $250,000 prize that we give, just gave it 2 weeks ago. We have it in wonderful ceremony. We give it to laureates from around the world. It's a very international award. Here are Gabisa Ejeta on the left from Ethiopia, Catherine Bertini from the United Nations. There's Monty Jones and Yun Long Ping, first African laureate in 2004. And then you've had 4 lecturers here doing this lecture: Pedro Sanchez, Phil Nelson, Joe Luck, and Daniel Hillel. So we're very honored to have such a close connection. So at the same time we give our $250,000 prize, we have a symposium that we call the Borlaug Dialogue. And people who know a lot more than me have called it the premier conference in the world on global agriculture. If we're even in the running for that recognition, I'd be pleased about that. But we have a wonderful array of speakers. Bill Gates gave his first ever address on agriculture and Africa at the World Food Prize. And, of course, Bill Gates can give an address wherever he wants. And Rajiv Shah, who was working for him, now is the head of USAID, called me up. And he said, Mr. Gates wants to give his first ever speech, and he would like to give it at the World Food Prize if you would invite him. And he wants to give it there because we from Gates have been there, and we meet a more diverse array of people at the World Food Prize than at any other conference we go to anywhere in the world. So I said, Raj, gosh, I wish you had called me a couple of weeks earlier. The program's very tight, and I don't know if we can squeeze him in. And you know I didn't say that, right? Yeah. I don't know, do you have defibrillators available here? Because thank God we had one in my office that, they revived me quickly, and I was able to say, of course, that. But Tony Blair's been there, Ban Ki-moon, Kofi Annan, but also we have smallholder farmers. Here's a woman who's a pastoralist from Tanzania who was there. We also have Secretary's Forum, Secretary Tom Vilsack. There he is with the ministers of Afghanistan and Pakistan there. And then we had a presidential roundtable with African presidents. But the most important part of the World Food Prize week is our Youth Institute. And here's Dr. Borlaug. He had such great affection for the young students, the next generation, as he referred to them. And so we have all of these big league speakers and deans of agriculture and research scientists like yourself and NGO leaders and CEOs. And we run in 160 high school students and 160 high school teachers, and we throw them in the room, and we stir and mix well, and hopefully some of that stardust that is rubbing off on them. Now, it started with just 13 students in 1994 when Borlaug and Ruan were sitting around and saying, now they're, 10 years older, they're in their mid-80s, and saying, so many old people around here, we need to get some young people in. And so we rounded up a few high school students. And now, 20 years later, it's one of the most innovative programs in America. And we have students come from 27 states, and they have this amazing experience. They get to interact with laureates. They have to present papers at our Youth Institute. They get to hear from leaders. Here they're meeting with, shaking hands with Ban Ki-moon and hearing President Lula da Silva of Brazil talk to them. And then we find the best 23 or 24 of them, and we send them out as Borlaug Ruan International Interns. Now, these are 17-year-olds and 18-year-old high school students. We send them for 8 weeks to work at international agricultural research centers in Africa and Asia, the Middle East, South America. DeAndre Harper, one of the ones I showed you earlier slide, from Georgia, went to CIMMYT in Mexico. And then at the same time, we send another 32 of them to USDA for paid internships called Wallace Carver Interns. That's the program that Keegan runs there. And Veronica Sondervane was there just this year from North Springs, Georgia. And they have these amazing experience. But the really interesting thing is that in this program, and I told all the young women from Sigma Alpha this morning at breakfast, 2/3 of the participants and almost all the superstars are young women. This is a program that inspires young women to pursue careers, education careers in agriculture. About 91% of those who are in our youth programs enroll in university in agriculture and science program. And about 82% go on after that, pursuing either postgraduate work or careers in agriculture. So we're so proud of this. And we also have a building called the Norman Borlaug Hall of Laureates. We raised $36 million to redo it. It's the old public library building. It's sort of like Norm's presidential library. And inside it, it's wonderfully redone. And our foundation did all the construction management, all the art management of it. And you'll see here, there's Norm's portrait, and around him are his 3 awards: Nobel Peace Prize, Congressional Gold Medal, Presidential Medal of Freedom. All the history of the United States of America, there's only 3 Americans to have those 3 awards: Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, and the farm boy from Cresco, Iowa, Norman Borlaug. And just to be sure Norm was proud of us, we made the building LEED Platinum. So the highest level of energy efficiency that you can do, and nearly impossible to do on 19th century buildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places. But we put 90 solar panels. Under that beautiful garden, there's 102 geothermal wells. All the water is rain and runoff off the roof that we capture on that. So that's kind of what the World Food Prize is about. Now I want to tell you about the Borlaug Centennial, because this has been the 100-year anniversary of Norman Borlaug's birth. And the biggest moment of the whole year came on March 25th, on his exact 100th birthday, when we were in Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol, and we unveiled Norman Borlaug's statue there among all the great heroes of our country. Iowa put his statue in. Each state gets 2 statues. I should have looked this up. I don't know the answer. I have a trivia question: who are Georgia's 2 statues? But somebody quick Google. Yes, then raise your hand with the answer. But ours were Civil War guys, and we took one out and brought him home. And there's Norm Borlaug right next to Rosa Parks. And in Statuary Hall. And here, all these frock-coated politicians from the 19th century, and a few from the 18th century. And here are these 2 people of such very common, ordinary background and origins who have attained this iconic place in our history. Who is it? Crawford Long? And Alexander Stevens. Yeah, anybody ever heard of them? So, yeah, so you should put Glenn Burton's statue in the U.S. Capitol. Sounds like it's time. But it's just so incredible that in our country it's possible for somebody who comes from this little farmhouse. You have to go there and see how small it is out in the most remote parts of Iowa, and could become somebody who's changed the world, just as Rosa Parks did in terms of civil rights. And so the other thing, great thing about Norman Borlaug, is that he had this unbelievable ability in life and death to bring together all of the political leaders who disagree about everything else. So there's John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell, and they're being nice to each other, and they're saying nice things. And in Iowa, where politics are, if I was only here one day, I heard plenty of ads on Georgia TV, but same thing in Iowa. People are pretty rough and tough on each other. But if it's about Norman Borlaug, the most liberal, most conservative people, all are in the same room, in the same picture together about that. And I haven't quite got them to be able to sing Kumbaya, but I'm working on that. So the Borlaug Centennial really began a year ago on World Food Day, when we gave our prize to the pioneers of agricultural biotechnology. I got a lot of nasty emails about our doing that, but it was the right thing to do. And then there were events all year: Mexico, at USDA, at the United Nations, in Uganda, India, Pakistan, at the US-Africa Summit. The first person that John Kerry talked about to all the African leaders who were assembled was Norman Borlaug. And John Kerry also took part in our laureate announcement statement, where we announced that Sanjaya Rajaram would be our laureate for this year. We just gave him our prize. Born in India, worked in Mexico, really, more than anybody else, carried Norman Borlaug's legacy forward in wheat, in what he did, increasing global wheat production by 200 million tons. But what really astounded me was when I found out that in Iran, they have this enormous regard for Norman Borlaug. And I got this email in July telling me that they were holding a celebration on August the 26th in Iran, honoring Borlaug and particularly honoring his commitment to biotechnology. So who knew? So they invited me to come and speak. My daughter is getting married in England on August 24th. And so I said, oh, I think I can make it. So I agreed, and I applied for a visa. And the visa didn't come, and didn't come, and didn't come, and didn't come. And as my wife and I were driving to the airport to fly to London, the phone rang, and it was Iran saying, oh, your visa just came through. Can you go to New York and pick it up? And I said, as much as I'd like to, I have to go to London for my daughter's wedding. Anyway, to make a long story short, finally got the visa in my passport and in my hand on Saturday, August 23rd, and now I could go. So I went to buy an airline ticket from Great Britain to Iran one way, because we weren't going back to London. And try buying an airline ticket, one-way ticket to Iran with an Iowa credit card in Great Britain. I want to tell you, I mean, who's buying one-way tickets to Iran, right? You know, is that before or after you blow up something or so? And that, but I finally convinced the credit card company to sell me the ticket, and I show up in Iran with my wife. Didn't know what to expect. How would we be received? Because there's no American diplomatic relations. And I get there at 2 a.m., go to bed at 4, I get up at 6, we drive to Karaj, and walk into a room like this filled with 400 Iranians, the Minister of Agriculture, the clerical representatives of the Grand Ayatollah there, and I'm standing up before them to talk about Norman Borlaug and his legacy. And so what do you say? And I said, you know, Norman Borlaug, when I was with him at the Nobel Peace Prize anniversary in 2001, one of the other laureates said, you know, people who can stand together and cheer together for the same thing can live in peace together. And I said, there are instances of being able to do this. You in Iran are confronting this new wheat rust disease, UGA, just as we in America are. Norman Borlaug's dream of dreams was that someday, using biotechnology, some scientist, whether it's in the US or Iran, will be able to discover the gene in rice that keeps it from ever having rust disease, and will implant it in wheat and barley and forever eradicate rust disease from the face of the earth. And I said to the Iranian audience, this is the opportunity, because if you and we do this together, we can have that moment where we can stand together and cheer together for the same thing, leaving unstated but clearly understood, and live in peace together, because this is the great legacy of agriculture. So I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was stunned that I got an immediate, instantaneous standing ovation led by the minister and the clerical representative of the Grand Ayatollah, who, when I was finished, came over and couldn't wait to shake my hand on that. And I came away from Iran saying that the power of Dr. Borlaug's legacy is so immense. It's so valuable as what can be done. So I extended an invitation to them to send a scientist to the World Food Prize. And there he is, Dr. Gudarz Najafian. So that was August, right? They didn't identify him till September. We had 1 month. It usually takes 8 months for an Iranian to get a visa application reviewed. And if you're lucky, approved. Got it done in 1 month. So I had to make some calls to the State Department but he was there on our wheat panel, and it's brought home to me the lesson, which is that confronting hunger can bring people together across even the broadest cultural, ethnic, religious, or diplomatic differences. And there's Daniel Hillel receiving the World Food Prize with the Secretary General of the United Nations. And what you can't maybe not understand but see in the other picture is there in the red dress is Princess Haya bint al-Hussein, Muslim princess. Hillel was nominated by 3 scientists from Arab countries, and he was the proof that in Iowa at the World Food Prize, you can have a moment. As Israeli Defense Force and Hamas were shooting at each other in Gaza at the World Food Prize, there could be a moment like this. That's the power of agriculture. So the final culminating event of the year for us was our Borlaug Dialogue, and our title was The Greatest Challenge in Human History. And it's that because of the exploding population. I like to explain it to people in this way, that Iowa was open for settlement in 1834. And the approximate population of the planet was 1 billion people. 80 years later, when Norman Borlaug was born, the world population was 1.7 million. So we added about 700 million people in that lead up to Norman Borlaug's birth. Norm died in 2009 at the age of 95. During those 95 years, the world population went to 7 billion. So the 80 years before, 700 million. The 95 years after, 5.3 billion. And in 32 years from now, when Iowa celebrates its bicentennial, it'll be 9 billion. And the question is it going to be 10 or 11 billion after that? So, and are we going to be able to feed everyone? So at our symposium, we did something called the Borlaug Report, which is meant to say, try to answer the question, are we on track to feed all those people? Because everybody talks about great challenge of feeding 9 billion people. But almost no one says how we're doing. Are we going to make it? Is it going to be easy? Is it, 50-50? Is it, unlikely we're going to make it? And that's what we tried to do with, brought Ken Kassman in and Gordon Conway and Swaminathan to lead panels. And here's what Ken Kassman, one of the truly great, distinguished scientists from University of Nebraska, Lincoln, said about this and what he wrote. And after looking at all these trend lines, he said that right now, in his view, being able to do it in view of all the climate change, the issues about sustainability, about fresh water availability, the answer is no. Now, he said, but there's time to change this. There's time to correct course. At the end of our conference, the Des Moines Register ran that headline. I don't know if it's quite as grim, but that's what they came to, because all during the conference we looked at what are the gaps. And there are the agricultural, nutrition, production gaps. But then on top of it, there's the political stability, the weather, the diseases, trade issues. Are we going to be able to bring all of these issues into the equation as well? And then at our conference, we also had, unfortunately, in place people to come from Sierra Leone, from Liberia, and we had a major focus on Ebola. And the head of Kaneo Nwanze, the head of IFAD, was there and talked about there would be a hunger crisis of epic proportions, farmers leaving fields to rot. Liberia, they talked about all the gains since 2006 have been wiped out. All of their commitments of international investment are withdrawn and gone. Of communities where most of the young people and farmers are now dead and abandoning their fields. One can only hope that the health measures in place will stop this, but the threat of new diseases and diseases that jump species add another precarious element to all of this. And at the same time, though, we had some instances of hope and inspiration for the next generation. The young woman on the right, Dr. Emma Naluyima, is the model for what smallholders can do. She has an amazing, on just 1 acre farm in Africa. She's the new rock star. You should invite her to come. She will just wow everyone here at the university. We also then are doing other things to inspire young people. We had 40 Chances program. I just gave 4 grants of $150,000 to the young people that you see there in the middle of this picture, funded by Howard G. Buffett and Buffett Foundation, with Tony Blair and the Africa Governance Initiative and the World Food Prize as the third partner. We found 4 individuals under the age of 40 who have these amazingly innovative market-based programs to confront hunger and poverty, and we just honored them at the World Food Prize. We also have our Norman Borlaug Award for Field Research and Application. For the last 3 years, it's a $10,000 prize, but to identify young extension workers, people who are out, like Borlaug, working close with producers. You know, we've had this wonderful array of winners for that. So the World Food Prize was about innovation, intensification, inspiration, and we blend in Norm's 3 main dreams. Passion is the green revolution to Africa, inspire the next generation, and take it to the farmer. So I wrote a piece for World Food Day to honor Norm, and it's appeared in National Geographic, and it says, if you want to make a dent in world hunger, that lesson I learned back in the Mekong Delta, you got to build better roads. I need to use better words. We need to build better roads. And when I was addressing the UN, I said, just imagine you take the UN hunger map and you spread it out, everyone. And on top of that, you'd put the CIA unclassified map of political terrorism, instability, and then you put an overlay of the world's roads and highway maps on top of that. And what you find is that where the road ends, the hunger, the malnutrition, the poverty, the political turmoil, the conflict, the terrorism begin. Africa has got about 40% rural road penetration. Southeast Asia, 95%, like most of the world. There's this direct correlation. There's not much time. My urging is that if you build the roads, that's where if you build it, the progress will come on that. But to take Norm's words is you can't take it to the farmer without good roads. And Norm confirmed that himself in 2004 when he wrote this passage, which I've copied up here, talking about the centrality that he gave to roads in development and all of the issues that they could uplift. So you should, nominate somebody for the World Food Prize, nominate someone for our Norman Borlaug Prize. I hope with coming down Dean Angle, you could look at the possibility of building a Georgia Youth Institute connected to the World Food Prize, have every high school in this state participating, sending a student to this campus, and then the winners get a trip to Des Moines to the World Food Prize on that. And everybody, even if you're not from Georgia or you're not an American citizen, you can cast a vote for Norman Borlaug today. And I hope all of you would go to our website and just write a note to Norm, tell him about your commitment to what is the greatest challenge that human beings have ever had to undertake, and what should be the central part of every political debate in America, but you don't hear anything about it. And with Norm Borlaug as the inspiration and your dedication and commitment, I feel comfortable that we can meet this greatest challenge. So thank you for having me today. And
Ambassador Quinn, we're running a little short on time, but I think we could take just a couple questions from the audience, if that would be okay with you. Questions from the audience? I would like to say this is also being broadcast to our 2 other campuses in Griffin and Tifton, and so they may be sending some messages through email to us, and we'll have those brought up to the podium. Questions?
Not so anxious to use biotechnology?
I think the issues about biotech get caught up in several other campaigns that people have. Some people believe there's social justice issues involved, and that big companies have too much power and smallholder farmers don't have enough. Some few people honestly believe that genetically modified organisms are dangerous to people's health or uncertain of what will happen. And so and then others feel that agriculture has become industrialized and that we should be going back to the way farming used to be 80 or 90 years ago and growing crops in bucolic settings, and that are wonderful visions on that. And it becomes then convenient, and particular companies' names become lightning rods for bringing all of this together, and it makes it feel like it's a cause, and they've cast it as a morality play, and it's good versus evil. So I was in India when the BT brinjal issue exploded on the scene. And this eggplant that had been developed and with Monsanto, and the environmental state minister said he wasn't going to allow it to be go further. And you could see that there was just this electricity that ran through the press, and they couldn't get enough of this. And we were at a conference, and somebody was still speaking, and the minister was sitting on the stage, and the press just sort of swarmed over this poor guy speaking and trying to speak, and they were all over the minister. So it's hard, and in India, of course, even if you have 5% of the population concerned, it's 5% of a billion. It's a lot of human beings. So there seems to be this sense of campaign, of righteousness, and what's dangerous is that the science doesn't prevail. And you see this sometimes, unfortunately, in our own country. And Borlaug was always about, we got to let the science, we got to follow the science. And that's what I grew up with, going through polio and all those epidemics of the science was so critical. And here, we have the greatest assemblage of agricultural scientific capability ever put together by human beings in the American university land-grant system. Nobody's ever done anything. This is like one of the glories of America. And that voice needs to be heard more than seemingly is. And whether it's how it's done or not wanting to engage in the arguments or what's there, but yours is the most powerful voice. And when scientists speak together, it's very powerful, and I'm sure all of you do, but somehow it doesn't seem to have that same collective impact that much smaller numbers of critics seem to have. You know, people are always trying to come in and handcuff themselves in my building and that, because even recognizing the people who did the scientific work, we don't recognize companies. That didn't matter. We're now the enemy on that. So, but you got to be prepared, you know. You can't back down in the face of intimidation, because if you do, then your prize isn't worth anything.
We have a question from Tifton. Do you see any opportunities in improving relationship with Iran through agriculture?
Absolutely, I do. You know, the negotiations on nuclear things are very hard and need to be done very carefully. And you don't want to make any shortcuts there. But what you can have is the opportunity of doing things through agriculture, research, and science that helps set the stage. So I'm old enough that I remember the nuclear threats of the Cold War in the 1950s. And the possibility of nuclear war with the Soviet Union seemed very, very real. And then Premier Khrushchev came to the United States, and he went to a farm in Iowa owned by Roswell Garst, and the two of them are out there at the corn crib and holding up corn and looking at it, and Garst is telling him, you can have this kind of corn in the Soviet Union. And he sent his nephew, his name was John Crystal, back and forth to the Soviet Union for the next 3 decades. So it helped diffuse that tense situation. If you can find things to do, in whether it's, you know, maybe it's about culture or music, but about food and agriculture seems so uniquely suited. You know, Herbert Hoover, who's, in my view, the single greatest humanitarian in the history of the United States of America, while working for a Democrat, for Woodrow Wilson, took food to the Soviet Union, to Poland, to Belgium, and even though Soviet Union was a communist country, and he abhorred communism, he brought food to feed Russian children for a decade. So the use of food between adversaries has got a rich history in America and needs to be something that we pursue. That's why I work so hard to get the Iranian scientists to come. I hope it'll be a spur to further actions. Sir?
Do you yourself see that we can feed 9 billion people by 2050 with all the technological advances in agriculture?
I think the critical thing will be whether you can uplift African smallholders who are basically just sustaining themselves. And if you can get to them, whether it's different technologies or way with seeds that are adapted or crops to their particular area, and Africa is not just like one place, it's so many different agricultural economies, but with a sustained effort and building a lot of roads, I believe that smallholders can be uplifted in a very short period of time. I saw it for myself in South Vietnam in the Mekong Delta. It can happen, but it takes a focused effort by political leaders, particularly in the West, and it's not there now. It's there more than it used to be, but it needs to be much, much more increased and more commitment made. And it needs to be the money for research. I mean, I think we run the risk of losing the premier place that America has always had in agricultural research if we are not providing the funding that's needed for the research that you all do in the public sector as well as in the private sector.
One more question. Wait for the microphone.
Hardware of the roads that you put into these places that aren't already there, in what way do those roads, if they carry the good and the good news and the good products that we do with agriculture, will it too not carry some of the evil that's already in place and increase some of the black market items?
Yes, so you always have to be careful. If you build a road out into a virgin forest or something, people will drive trucks there and cut down the trees illegally. I used to chase illegal loggers in Cambodia in my four-wheel drive with my American flag on the front of my car with the Minister of Environment, you know, running them out. I didn't have any Marines there. I have to rethink maybe doing that. But I was younger and foolish. But, roads can do that. The Ebola travels down roads, and diseases can travel much more quickly on roads. So there's always a trade-off. And, of course, it's the roads that transformed America. I don't know about Georgia, but Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, that's what changed America. That's what transformed our states, because then the extension workers from the land grants could get out. Henry Wallace's hybrid corn could get out there. And the Eisenhower four-lane highways transformed America. But along with it, with shortened distances, economies change, towns, farms become bigger. So, yes, there are things that can happen. You're right. But I would say if it's a choice, for those smallholder farmers who are living in poverty, this is the way to give them a chance to uplift them and their children out of the terrible situation they're in.
Thank you. Let's give Ambassador Quinn one more round of applause. Thank you, Ambassador. That was wonderful.
Oh,
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today, and for our award winners today, congratulations to all of you. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay. Yeah.